17. Black R&B legends who had horrifying deathbed confessions. What if everything you thought you knew about legendary Black R&B icons was shaped not by facts, but by rumors repeated long after their voices were silenced? Across the internet, shocking claims of deathbed confessions promise hidden truths but rarely provide evidence. Today, Legends of Black Excellence pulls the curtain back. No conspiracy, no fake news, just verified history, uncomfortable facts, and the real human cost of fame. Stay with us until the end, because one question may change how you hear these legends forever. Subscribe, like, and comment. Truth deserves an audience. Sam Cooke. Sam Cooke was celebrated not only as a velvet-voiced R&B icon, but as a fearless advocate of Black economic self-determination. In the early 1960s, he stood apart from his peers by founding his own publishing and record companies, preaching ownership as loudly as he sang about love. According to the video narrative, this public image of independence hid a private torment. As Cooke's career soared, pressure mounted over money, family security, and the fear that his estate would collapse into chaos if he died suddenly. When Cooke was killed in December 1964, at just 33 years old, the shock was compounded by the fact that he left no finalized will, opening the door to forces waiting in the shadows. The video centers on an alleged secret audio recording said to have been made shortly before his death, in which Cooke privately negotiated with his manager, Allen Klein. In this account, Cooke is portrayed as emotionally exhausted, admitting that he agreed to a covert arrangement that allowed Klein to gain legal control over his publishing. The supposed confession suggests Cooke knowingly sacrificed ownership of his catalog in exchange for guaranteed financial security for his wife Barbara and their children. The horror, as framed by the video, lies in the contradiction. The man who symbolized Black ownership allegedly signed away his legacy in a moment of fear and desperation. Whether literal or symbolic, this deathbed confession represents a devastating moral collapse within the story's framework. The video portrays Cooke as fully aware that the deal violated everything he stood for, yet choosing family survival over principle. After his death, Klein's company ultimately controlled much of Cooke's publishing, turning this alleged confession into a cultural wound. Sam Cooke's music remains immortal, but the narrative insists his final truth was tragic. Even the strongest pioneers can be broken by fear, and the price of silence can be the permanent loss of a legacy meant to empower generations. James Brown. James Brown was revered as the undisputed godfather of soul, a man whose music fueled Black pride, resilience, and power for generations. On stage, he was discipline, control, and authority personified. Yet the video's narrative draws a sharp and disturbing contrast between the public icon and a private life marked by violence. Central to this story is his third wife, Adrienne Brown, whose marriage to James Brown was repeatedly described in police reports and media coverage as turbulent and abusive. When Adrienne died in 1996 at the age of 47, the official cause was listed as complications following cosmetic surgery. To the public, the case was closed quickly, quietly, and without deeper scrutiny. According to the video, the truth did not remain buried. Years later, during James Brown's final days in 2006, an alleged deathbed confession emerged through the testimony of a medical attendant said to have been present as Brown drifted in and out of consciousness. In this account, Brown is portrayed as emotionally fractured, speaking in fear and remorse. He allegedly admitted to violently assaulting Adrienne during a domestic dispute and then deliberately withholding medical help as she lay critically injured. The confession claims Brown used his immense influence through lawyers, doctors, and loyal associates to ensure her death was framed as a medical accident rather than the result of abuse. Within the video's framing, this was not a moment of rage but a calculated act, followed by a systematic cover-up. The horror of this story lies not only in the alleged act itself, but in the power dynamic it exposes. The video presents James Brown as a man who weaponized fame, fear, and authority to silence the truth, and protect his legacy. While his musical contributions remain undeniable, this narrative forces viewers to confront a darker reckoning that unchecked power can rot even the most celebrated figures from within. In the video's conclusion, Brown's alleged confession stands as a grim warning. Talent and influence may shape history, but they cannot erase guilt when the reckoning finally arrives. Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye's voice carried vulnerability, romance, and spiritual longing, but behind the beauty was a man locked in emotional warfare. By the mid-1970s, Gaye was drowning in financial trouble, addiction, and a bitter divorce from Anna Gordy, sister of Motown founder Berry Gordy. Court documents confirm that in 1976, a judge ordered Marvin to pay alimony in an unusual way. The royalties from his next album would go directly to Anna. What followed became one of the most infamous chapters in R&B history. Instead of walking away, Gaye chose to turn the courtroom loss into a deeply personal artistic statement. Released in 1978, Here My Dear was unlike anything before it. The album openly dissected his marriage, detailing arguments, sexual intimacy, resentment, and blame. Critics at the time called it uncomfortable and even cruel. According to the video's narrative, Marvin privately acknowledged that this was intentional. He allegedly admitted to close associates that he used the album as a form of psychological retaliation, knowing Anna would be forced to profit from songs that publicly exposed her. While no verified deathbed recording exists, biographers note that Gaye later described the album as something he made out of anger, not love, a rare admission of weaponizing his art. In the years before his death in 1984, Marvin Gaye reportedly reflected on Here My Dear with deep regret. The video frames this reflection as a symbolic deathbed confession, an understanding that he crossed a moral line by turning private pain into public humiliation. The horror is not criminal, but ethical, an artist realizing too late that brilliance can be used to wound as deeply as it can heal. Today, Here My Dear is praised as a masterpiece, yet its origin story remains unsettling. It stands as a cautionary tale. When art becomes revenge, the scars can outlive both love and life itself. Ray Charles. Ray Charles was hailed as a musical genius who reshaped American sound, blending gospel, blues, jazz, and R&B into something entirely new. Blind from childhood, he was often portrayed as morally guided by instinct and faith. Yet, behind the legend, the video paints a far darker portrait, one centered on systematic tax evasion and financial manipulation that spanned decades. Public records confirm that Ray Charles faced serious tax troubles, including federal tax liens and disputes with the IRS involving millions of dollars. But the video argues this was not careless accounting. It was deliberate, organized, and hidden behind layers of loyal intermediaries. According to the video narrative, Charles allegedly constructed a network of associates, managers, and shell arrangements designed to move money quietly and obscure income streams. Trusted aides were tasked with signing documents, opening accounts, and absorbing legal exposure, while Charles maintained plausible deniability. In this version of events, Ray Charles knowingly allowed others to take the fall when authorities closed in. The most disturbing claim centers on an alleged private admission late in life, when Charles supposedly confessed that success had turned people into tools. He is quoted in the video as saying he learned how to buy other people's souls, not with violence, but with money, loyalty, and fear of losing access to power. As Ray Charles approached the end of his life in 2004, the video frames his reflections as a moral reckoning rather than a legal one. The confession is portrayed not as regret over unpaid taxes, but as shame over exploiting those who believed they were helping a genius survive a hostile industry. Whether literal or symbolic, the horror lies in the idea that brilliance created a hierarchy where others paid the price. Ray Charles left behind an untouchable musical legacy, but within the video's framing, his final truth is sobering: talent can create empires, but empires often demand silent sacrifices from those standing closest to the throne. Ike Turner. Ike Turner was a foundational architect of early rock and R&B, a band leader whose musical vision helped launch Tina Turner into global superstardom. But behind the driving rhythms and explosive stage shows existed a culture of fear. Police reports, court documents, and Tina Turner's own autobiography, Tina describe years of documented domestic violence arrests and hospitalizations. Ike himself later admitted in interviews that he physically abused Tina, though he often attempted to minimize or rationalize it. By the time his career collapsed under drug addiction and legal trouble, Ike Turner had become a symbol not just of musical innovation, but of unchecked power turned inward. The video goes further, presenting an alleged deathbed letter said to have been written near the end of Ike Turner's life in 2007. In this narrative, the letter is framed as a final confession in which Ike purportedly admitted to systematic sexual abuse, psychological manipulation, and coercive control over women in his orbit, including members of the Ikettes. The most disturbing claims suggest he used drugs not only recreationally, but as a tool of dominance, keeping performers dependent, compliant, and silent. The video explicitly frames these statements as unverified, but consistent with long-standing allegations from former associates who described a culture of intimidation around Ike Turner's organization. Whether literal or symbolic, the horror of Ike Turner's story lies in repetition. This was not a single act of violence, but an institutional pattern enabled by fame, fear, and an industry willing to look away as long as the music sold. In the video's framing, Ike's final acknowledgement is not redemptive, it is damning. It suggests awareness without repair, confession without accountability. His legacy forces an uncomfortable truth onto viewers' musical genius does not excuse cruelty, and silence can be just as damaging as abuse itself. The music survived, but so did the scars. Jackie Wilson. Jackie Wilson was one of the most electrifying performers in R&B history. A man whose charisma, athletic stage presence, and soaring vocals influenced generations of singers. To the public, he was Mr. Excitement. Privately, however, his life was marked by turmoil, volatile relationships, and repeated financial exploitation by record executives. By the late 1960s, Wilson was physically and emotionally exhausted, plagued by health problems, and trapped in contracts that left him nearly broke, despite selling millions of records. This imbalance between fame and control set the stage for the disturbing narrative explored in the video. According to the video, shortly before Wilson suffered the catastrophic on-stage collapse in 1975 that left him in a coma until his death in 1984, there allegedly existed a private audio confession circulated among insiders. In this account, Wilson reportedly admitted to being physically abusive in intimate relationships, describing rage episodes he could no longer justify. The video frames this not as a legal confession, but as a moment of shame and fear, Wilson realizing his behavior mirrored the violence he himself had experienced growing up. While this tape has never been publicly released or authenticated, the story persists because it aligns with later testimonies from people close to him. The most chilling element comes after. The video alleges that Brunswick Records, desperate to protect a valuable brand, actively shaped media narratives around Wilson's personal scandals. When violent incidents surfaced, they were allegedly reframed through sensational but misleading stories, most notably the myth of obsessive female fans causing chaos in his life. According to the video's framing, this strategy redirected blame away from Wilson and the label's failure to intervene, preserving profits while burying uncomfortable truths. The horror here is systemic, a damaged man, a complicit industry, and a legacy carefully edited for public consumption. Jackie Wilson's music remains timeless, but the story insists his silence, and the silence enforced around him came at a devastating human cost. Barry White. Barry White built his image on romance. His deep, velvety voice became synonymous with love, intimacy, and emotional safety, making him one of the best-selling R&B artists of the 1970s. To the public, he was the soundtrack of trust. But the video deliberately dismantles that image, presenting a disturbing contrast between Barry White's sensual persona and a hidden private world shaped by control, secrecy, and exploitation. As his health declined in the early 2000s, the story claims that unresolved guilt began to surface long after his power to shape the narrative had faded. According to the video, White allegedly left behind a private written statement and digital notes described as a final confession, never intended for public release. In this account, he is said to have admitted to committing acts of sexual coercion earlier in his career, exploiting his fame and industry influence. Even more disturbing, the video claims White maintained audio recordings and compromising material involving women connected to his inner circle. These recordings were allegedly used not for profit, but for silence and insurance policy to prevent accusations from surfacing. The video frames this as a calculated system of intimidation rather than isolated misconduct, emphasizing that fear, not affection, sustained his control. What makes the story horrifying is not just the alleged acts, but the betrayal of identity. The video portrays Barry White as a man who consciously weaponized intimacy, using the language of love as camouflage for dominance. As his life neared its end in 2003, the narrative claims he expressed dread not of death but of exposure. Whether literal or symbolic, the confession represents a collapse of the myth he built so carefully. The music still seduces, but the story forces viewers to confront an uncomfortable truth: when power hides behind romance, victims often remain invisible. In the video's framing, Barry White's final silence speaks louder than any love song he ever recorded. Wilson Pickett. Wilson Pickett's voice was raw power. Known for hits like In the Midnight Hour and Mustang Sally, he embodied the ferocity and emotion of Southern soul. Yet offstage, Pickett's life was repeatedly marked by volatility, arrests, and documented incidents of violence. Court records confirm multiple legal troubles over the years, including assault charges and DUI arrests, reinforcing a public record of instability. As his health deteriorated in the early 2000s, the contrast between the celebrated performer and the troubled man became impossible to ignore. The video presents one of its most disturbing claims here: an alleged hospital bed phone call made during Pickett's final illness in 2006. According to the narrative, Pickett privately admitted to a violent assault on his longtime partner, Jean-Marie Coussau, during a domestic altercation years earlier. The video claims the attack resulted in catastrophic injuries that left her permanently disabled. In this account, Pickett is portrayed as emotionally broken, acknowledging that his actions destroyed another person's life. It is crucial to note that this alleged confession has never been publicly released or independently verified. The video frames it as insider testimony rather than court-established fact. What elevates the horror within the video's structure is the claim that the aftermath was handled quietly through money rather than justice. The narrative alleges that financial settlements were used to secure silence, avoiding criminal exposure, while allowing Pickett's career to continue largely uninterrupted. The story is not presented as redemption, but as a moral failure sealed by time. In the video's framing, Wilson Pickett's final reckoning is not about fame or music. It is about the weight of irreversible harm. The songs remain explosive and alive, but the legend is left shadowed by a final, unresolved truth. Talent can survive scandal, but guilt has no stage to hide on when the music stops. Luther Vandross. Luther Vandross was long admired as the embodiment of elegance in R&B, a soft-spoken, impeccably dressed vocalist whose music defined romance for adult America. His public image was carefully maintained as that of a private, gentle perfectionist. Factually, Vandross spent the final years of his life battling severe health issues, including diabetes and a massive stroke in 2003 that left him unable to speak before his death in 2005. No court records or police files publicly link him to a fatal accident. Yet the video introduces a far darker narrative, deliberately framed as allegation and insider testimony, not established legal fact. According to the video, during Vandross's final period of hospitalization, an alleged private confession was shared with a trusted intermediary. In this account, Vandross reportedly admitted responsibility for a fatal car accident earlier in his career, an incident that was never publicly connected to him. The narrative claims that, fearing the destruction of his carefully protected image, legal representatives intervened immediately. The video alleges that lawyers negotiated aggressively, while corrupt elements within law enforcement were bribed to redirect blame and suppress evidence. Again, the video stresses these claims are unverified and absent from public record, existing only within whispered industry lore. What makes this story horrifying within the video's framing is not violence, but deception by omission. Vandross is portrayed as a man who built a pristine public identity while privately carrying unbearable guilt. The alleged confession is depicted not as a plea for forgiveness, but as an admission that reputation mattered more than accountability. Whether literal or symbolic, the narrative uses this story to challenge the myth of the perfect gentleman. Luther Vandross's music remains untouched, tender, graceful, eternal. But the video asks viewers to consider an unsettling possibility that silence, when purchased by power and money, can be as morally devastating as the crime itself. Florence Ballard. Florence Ballard was the original heart of the Supremes, the powerhouse voice that helped launch Motown's most successful female group. In the early 1960s, Ballard was widely regarded as the group's strongest singer. Yet behind the scenes, she was increasingly marginalized as Diana Ross was pushed to the forefront. By 1967, Ballard was abruptly removed from the group, leaving her financially unstable, emotionally shattered, and largely abandoned by the industry she helped build. Public records and interviews confirm that she struggled with poverty, depression, and supporting her family, surviving at times on welfare despite having helped create a catalog worth millions. The video introduces a disturbing narrative centered on an alleged private memoir or written confession said to have been drafted during Ballard's final years before her death in 1976 at age 32. According to the video, Ballard allegedly admitted that in a moment of extreme desperation, she agreed to quietly sign away or facilitate the sale of certain financial interests tied to the Supremes' earnings. The story claims this was done in exchange for immediate cash, meant to keep her family housed and fed. Within the video's framing, this act is portrayed not as greed, but as survival, an agonizing choice made by a woman who believed she had already been erased from history. What makes this story horrifying is its moral complexity. The video does not present Ballard as a villain, but as a casualty of an industry that discarded her once she was no longer profitable. The alleged confession is framed as a moment of shame and heartbreak, a woman realizing she had compromised not only herself, but the collective legacy of the group she helped create. Whether literal or symbolic, the story underscores a painful truth. Florence Ballard did not betray the Supremes out of malice, she was betrayed first. Her music lives on, but her final story, as told in the video, stands as a devastating reminder that desperation can force even the most gifted pioneers into impossible choices. Mary Wells. Mary Wells was Motown's first true female superstar, the voice behind early hits like My Guy, that helped turn Berry Gordy's label into a cultural powerhouse. Yet despite her success, Wells's career became a cautionary tale about contracts, power imbalance, and broken promises. By the mid-1960s, she had left Motown believing she could regain control of her music and future. Publicly, her departure was framed as a bold move for independence. Privately, however, Wells faced declining health, financial instability, and mounting regret struggles that followed her until her death from cancer in 1992 at just 49 years old. According to the video's narrative, Wells later made a private admission described as a symbolic deathbed confession, rather than a documented legal statement. In this account, she allegedly revealed that in desperation, she attempted to bribe or secretly compensate Motown-connected intermediaries in hopes of reclaiming rights to her recordings and unpaid royalties. The video claims she believed informal agreements and behind-the-scenes payments would succeed where contracts had failed. Instead, She was allegedly misled. Money changed hands. Promises were made, but ownership never returned. Importantly, the video presents this as unverified insider testimony, not as established legal fact, and no court records confirm a bribery case. The horror in this story lies not in criminal intent, but in false hope. The video portrays Mary Wells as a woman who trusted a system that had already proven it would not protect her. Her alleged confession is framed as an acknowledgement that she had been naive, believing access and influence could replace written power. Whether literal or metaphorical, the story underscores a brutal industry lesson: once control is lost, it is rarely given back. Mary Wells' voice remains immortal, but the narrative insists her final truth was tragic, that faith in corrupt shortcuts cost her everything, leaving her legacy intact for listeners but financially out of reach for the woman who created it. Little Willie John. Little Willie John was one of the most gifted yet tragic voices in early R&B, a singer whose emotional delivery influenced legends from Ray Charles to James Brown. Despite chart success in the 1950s, his life unraveled under the weight of alcoholism, volatility, and repeated arrests. In 1964, John was convicted of manslaughter following a nightclub altercation and sentenced to prison in Washington state. He died in custody in 1968, at just 30 years old, officially from a heart attack. On paper, his story ends there. Another brilliant talent destroyed too young. The video, however, presents a far darker and more unsettling account drawn from alleged testimony by a former cellmate, not from court records. According to this narrative, Little Willie John entered prison consumed by rage, paranoia, and a desire for control. The inmate claimed John intentionally provoked violent confrontations, escalating tensions in hopes of killing another prisoner, either to assert dominance or to force a transfer through extreme violence. The video frames this as a deliberate strategy born from desperation, suggesting John believed prison violence was his only remaining form of power. Crucially, this account is presented as unverified personal testimony, not documented fact. The horror, as the video tells it, lies in the outcome. Instead of succeeding, John's own body failed him. The alleged plan collapsed when his heart gave out during or after one of these confrontations, turning his aggression inward. In this framing, Little Willie John did not escape violence, he was consumed by it. Whether literal or symbolic, the story functions as a grim cautionary tale, a gifted artist destroyed not only by the system but by his own impulses. His music remains haunting and alive, but the video insists his final chapter reflects a brutal truth that when anger becomes identity, it can ultimately become a death sentence of its own. Otis Redding. Otis Redding was at the peak of his power in December 1967. At just 26 years old, he had crossed over to mainstream America, conquered the Monterey Pop Festival, and was preparing for what many believed would be the defining chapter of his career. Official records state that Redding died when a chartered Beechcraft H-18 plane crashed into Lake Monona, Wisconsin, killing 7 of the 8 people on board. The National Transportation Safety Board later cited poor weather and pilot error. For decades, that explanation stood largely unquestioned, simple, tragic, and final. The video, however, introduces a far more unsettling layer to the story. According to its narrative, an alleged audio recording made shortly before the flight captured Otis Redding privately acknowledging that the plane was carrying unauthorized overweight cargo. This cargo, described as smuggled goods tied to tour finances and off-the-books payments, was said to have exceeded safe load limits. In the video's framing, Redding is portrayed as conflicted, but resigned, aware of the danger, yet unwilling to delay the flight due to scheduling pressure money and trust in those managing the logistics. It is important to note that no such tape has ever been publicly verified. The video presents this claim as insider testimony rather than established aviation fact. The horror of the story lies in inevitability. According to the video's interpretation, the crash was not merely an accident, but the final consequence of accumulated risk, silence, and compromise. Overloading the aircraft, flying into severe weather, and ignoring warnings created a chain that could no longer be broken once the plane left the ground. Whether literal or symbolic, this alleged confession reframes Otis Redding's death as a cautionary tale about how success can push artists into fatal decisions they do not fully control. His voice lives forever, but the story insists his final flight carried more than music. It carried the weight of choices that ended everything at once. Etta James. Etta James lived a life as raw and powerful as her voice. From At Last to I'd Rather Go Blind, she transformed pain into art, but she never hid her lifelong battles with heroin, cocaine, and relapse. These struggles are well documented in her autobiography, Rage to Survive, and in multiple interviews where she openly admitted that addiction repeatedly pushed her into destructive choices. By the late 2000s, as her health declined from leukemia and dementia, Etta's physical strength faded, but her past continued to haunt her. According to the video's narrative, one of the most disturbing moments came during periods of medical delirium near the end of her life in 2011. The video claims that Etta allegedly confessed while heavily medicated to having sold or traded personal memorabilia once belonging to Billie Holiday items she had access to through collectors and private circles earlier in her career. The story suggests these artifacts, described as culturally priceless, were exchanged not for profit or prestige, but to settle urgent drug debts during her worst periods of addiction. There is no public inventory police report or verified transaction confirming this claim, and the video frames it explicitly as unproven insider testimony rather than established fact. What makes this story horrifying within the video's framing is its symbolism. Billie Holiday represented sacred ground in Black music history, pain, resistance, and truth preserved through song. The alleged confession is portrayed not as greed, but as shame, an artist realizing she may have helped erase fragments of Black cultural memory to feed her own survival. Whether literal or metaphorical, the story reflects a brutal reality Etta James openly acknowledged throughout her life, that addiction can drive even the most revered voices to betray what they love most. Her music remains immortal, but the narrative leaves viewers with a chilling question: how much cultural history has been quietly lost to desperation, silence, and untreated pain? Teddy Pendergrass. Teddy Pendergrass rose to fame as the magnetic voice of Philadelphia soul, a performer whose raw sensuality and commanding presence defined late 1970s R&B. After a devastating car accident in 1982 left him paralyzed, Pendergrass rebuilt his life in the public eye, becoming a symbol of resilience and redemption. Importantly, no court records, convictions, or verified investigations ever established criminal sexual abuse by Pendergrass, and he was never charged with crimes involving minors. This distinction matters because the video's narrative does not rely on proven fact, but on allegation, rumor, and contested testimony that surfaced long after his career peak. According to the video, a private, unpublished memoir or set of notes described as a secret confession circulated among insiders near the end of Pendergrass's life in 2010. The video claims these writings included admissions of inappropriate relationships with underage individuals, allegedly facilitated through fame, access, and manipulation. It further alleges that legal pressure through cease and desist letters and intimidation by attorneys was used to silence accusers before claims could reach public scrutiny. The video is explicit that no documents have been authenticated, no names verified, and no legal findings support these accusations. They are presented as insider lore, not established history. The horror, as framed by the video, lies in the possibility rather than proof, the idea that immense power can bury truth, whether real or imagined, and that silence can be enforced by fear of litigation. In this telling, the confession is less a legal admission than a moral reckoning, an acknowledgement of lines crossed and influence abused. Yet the ambiguity is central. Without evidence, these claims remain unproven and deeply contested, raising a critical question for viewers: how should legacies be judged when stories emerge without verification? Teddy Pendergrass's music endures as a pillar of R&B. The video challenges audiences to weigh admiration against uncertainty, without confusing allegation for fact. Aretha Franklin. Aretha Franklin was more than the Queen of Soul, she was an institution. For over 5 decades, her voice carried civil rights faith and cultural authority unmatched in American music. Yet in her final years, Franklin became intensely private, guarding her health, finances, and personal circle with near-total control. It is documented fact that her medical condition was kept secret from the public for years, and that even close associates were often unaware of the seriousness of her illness until the very end. This extreme privacy would later give rise to darker speculation. The video frames Aretha's story not as proven crime, but as industry folklore surrounding power and fear. According to unverified accounts cited in the narrative, Franklin allegedly believed rivals and business adversaries were waiting for signs of weakness. In moments of illness and medication-induced confusion, she was said to speak obsessively about control, about doctors' paperwork, and who gets to decide the story. The video does not claim poisoning or falsified records as fact, but presents them as symbolic fears expressed during vulnerable moments, a woman who had ruled her world for decades, terrified of losing authority at the end. The horror in this story is psychological, not criminal. Aretha Franklin's confession, as framed by the video, is about mistrust, not murder, about how absolute power can isolate even the most revered figures. Her final battle was not against rivals, but against exposure, decline, and loss of command over her own narrative. The music remains pure and untouchable. But the myth persists because it reflects a deeper truth: when legends live their entire lives in control, surrender even to doctors, even to time, can feel like betrayal. Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry was one of the architects of modern popular music, a pioneer whose guitar riffs and storytelling helped define rock and R&B for generations. Yet unlike many legends whose scandals remained rumors, Berry's legal troubles are documented historical fact. In 1979, he was convicted of tax evasion and sentenced to 4 months in prison and fined $50,000 for failing to report income from his business ventures. In 1990, he again pleaded guilty to tax-related charges, admitting he had not properly reported earnings, leading to probation and community service. These cases established a clear pattern: Berry's relationship with money and the law was not accidental, it was ongoing. The video builds on these facts by introducing an alleged late-life audio recording described as a private conversation never meant for release. According to the video's narrative, Berry allegedly admitted that his tax evasion was systematic and intentional, stretching across decades. He is portrayed as believing the government, record labels, and promoters were exploiting him, and that hiding income was his way of reclaiming control. The video claims Berry knowingly used constant touring, complex royalty streams, and the chaos of live performance payments to obscure cash flow, effectively letting his music career act as a shield for financial misconduct. While no such tape has been publicly authenticated, the claim is framed as insider testimony rather than courtroom evidence. What makes this story horrifying is not surprise, but cold logic. In the video's telling, Chuck Berry did not see himself as a criminal, he saw himself as smarter than the system. His alleged confession suggests no remorse, only justification that genius entitled him to bend rules written by others. The reckoning came not through exposure, but exhaustion. Berry's legacy remains foundational, untouchable in sound, but morally complicated. The story closes on a hard truth aimed at viewers: when art becomes camouflage, brilliance can hide wrongdoing for years until time itself becomes the only auditor no legend can outplay. At the end of every legend story, a question remains. The narratives surrounding deathbed confessions say less about these black icons than they do about us. The audience still hungry for dramatic endings. From Sam Cooke to Chuck Berry, history shows documented struggles, public accountability, and artistic triumph, not secret final admissions whispered in shadows. When evidence is replaced by rumor, legacy becomes distortion. Legends of Black excellence stands on truth, not sensationalism. So here is the debate we leave you with. Are we honoring Black greatness by repeating unproven stories, or diminishing it by refusing to accept complexity without scandal?